40 Elf Who Can Say Yes or No by Hotpinkzebrapolish. Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to be doing a cute little elf, and you can wiggle the little present that's under his feet, and if you wiggle it back and forth he'll say no, and if you push it up and down he'll say yes. And I had so much fun with this. After I did this, I went over to my nephew, his name is Stefan, and I looked at the elf and I said, "Has Stefan been good this year?" And I said no. And then I looked at him and I said, "Has Katie been good this year?" And the elf said yes. And I don't know, it cracked me up. So then I went and I did that with all the rest of my nephews, and they all looked at me like I was a lunatic, and it was fantastic. So I hope you like this design and have as much fun with it as I did, and don't forget to click subscribe to see my future videos as well. So to begin, I'm going to cut a little piece off of a straw, and I used a green straw this time just because I knew that it would be red and green in my final design, so I thought if any of it showed, green would be better. And I cut it to the length that I knew that my elf's body was going to be. So I wanted to make him have a nice big, like a bobblehead head, so I made sure I left over half the nail for that, and I just put some nail glue down and glued his little body straw in place. And then using some white acrylic, I'm just going to overlay the rest of the nail. And as I'm doing this, I am making sure, very, very sure, that I'm not getting any acrylic inside the straw. That is so important. If you do get acrylic in the straw, you either are going to need to file that out with an e-file, or good luck. So just make sure that you don't get any acrylic in there. And if you're watching as you're doing this, you know, cautiously doing smaller beads instead of trying to do like the whole thing at one time, it shouldn't be too bad. Just make sure that you don't get any acrylic inside your straw. You can get it right up to it though, but as you're getting closer to the opening, especially at the top, make sure it kind of like fades down in so that there is still, it's not like a abrupt stop either. You want to, because your wire has to go through there. And now I'll be encasing the nail with some clear acrylic. You could have done the entire thing with white and not used any clear if you wanted to. I like the consistency of working with clear acrylic better, so once I had the white in the background just for color, then I like to use clear instead. Plus it's a little stronger, which is always a nice thing to have, some strength. And so I then covered it up with some clear acrylic, doing exactly the same thing as I did with the white. And then I also went and I tried to blend it up to the straw. The straw is a pretty thick one, so I didn't necessarily need to go all the way up to that height, but just sort of smoothing the transition from the acrylic to the straw across the top. So now I'm going to be filing it and being very careful not to file through my straw, and then I'll just apply a layer of gel sealer and cure it. And I also apply the gel sealer up over the straw. That's also going to further fix that transition a little bit. So now I'm going to be sculpting out my little elf, or his body I suppose, not the rest of him. So I just did his pants with white, and I did them with white because I knew I was going to add some candy cane stripes later, and it's easy to make red stripes on white instead of making white stripes on red, so I made his pants white, and I know they're hard to see at the moment, but later they will be a lot more visible. And now I'm going to be making his little shirt, and I use it's a really nice sort of a lime green. And it's not lime green like you think of the color lime green, it's the color of a lime. That's, yeah. Or avocado, it's kind of an avocado green. Anyways, so I made his little shirt first, and then I added his sleeves to the sides. So each of these, both the shirt and the sleeves, are kind of a trapezoid, so they pinch in a little bit at the top of the shapes, but they're also kind of rectangular. And then I'll be adding his little elf shoes with a nice little curl up at the tip of the toe. So he's got, you know, how elf shoes always, the toes curl up. I wanted to make sure I added that, and his feet are just sticking straight out to the sides. If you're a dancer, like in first position, if you're not a dancer, you might not understand that reference. And then I added a tiny little bit of a cover pink for his hands, which almost completely disappeared on top of the white. So now on a nail form backing, using the same cover pink, I'm going to be sculpting my elf's head. So I began with just laying down a bead and then working it into an oval. On the nail form backing, the acrylic spreads really fast, and so you're going to end up, if you just leave it the way it was, it would be very thin, which it is. So then I just added another bead just to add some more thickness. I wanted to have a really nice dome shape, and so I really pushed in from the sides to make the sides as rounded as I could. There will be more adjusting later on, but I also added that other bead on top just to make sure that it's not flat. You want them to be nice and a round head. And so then I'm going to be adding his hat with the same debatable color of green for his hat as I did for his shirt. And so just a little triangle up on top, and then using this really pretty sparkly gold color that I always think reminds me of like a caramel latte. I'm going to be adding that for the band around his hat, just like that. So just lay the beads down and pull them into a nice little stripe, and then a little bit on top of his hat. And then I'll add his nose and let that set. Once it is set, you can peel it off, and then I just stuck it onto my nail brush cover with some poster putty, that's the word. And I'm just going to repeat the steps for the back of his head, making sure that first with the cover pink, it's nice and rounded, just like the top. You want the back of his head to be rounded because as you're turning it back and forth, if it's flat, it's not going to say no very easily. But if it has that nice rounded shape, it's going to just sort of rotate really nice and easy. So you want to make sure the back of his head has a rounded shape as well. While that acrylic is still wet, poke your little piece of wire up where his neck would be, just like that. Or you could have done that before you put on the back of his head. Either way, I forgot to do it, so that's why I added it at this point, but you could have done that before too. And then I'm going to be adding his ears on the sides of his head. And so I just did the one, and then I did the other one for more of a straight on view so I could tell, make sure they're even. You don't want one ear to be a lot higher than the other, although that does happen in life. Not everyone's ears are completely symmetrical or at the same height from side to side. And then using sort of a yellow gold acrylic, I'm going to be adding the little bits of hair. So I just put down some beads, and I didn't really do much to them. I just used really small beads and just set them down. They're going to stay in sort of their little circles, and that's going to make him look like he's got sort of curly hair. And on the back of his head, I didn't do too much with it. I just laid it down and then spread it out. But then I'm going to take and put some nail glue on the base of his skull. Sounds a little anatomical. And then I'm going to glue a little piece, and I use some just regular crafting felt, just a tiny little strip onto the back of his head, and then I'm going to glue that same little bit of felt, curl the ends of his scarf around, and then glue them to the front of his shirt. So in one place, in the back is glued to his head, and in the front it's glued to his shirt. That is important. Make sure that you don't glue it completely around him on either side. And then I cut off the extra wire. Then I held a nail form backing underneath the end of the wire. This is going to be for making the little handle present. And then on that nail form backing that I'm holding there, I'm going to be sculpting out a nice little square for the gift with red. And so, like I said, I just want to go back and touch on the scarf again. So in the back it is glued to his head, and on the front it is glued to his shirt. That way his head and the elf is actually attached to the nail, but it's only attached through that little bit of material that is glued, and the material is glued to both the elf's head and to his shirt. Like I said, that is so important because that's going to keep it attached and on there, but it's also going to give it that freedom of movement. And you want to make sure the material you use, it doesn't have to be felt, it can be anything you want. But it has to be a material that's no fray because you don't want it to all of a sudden turn into a pile of thread. And you also want it to be a material that's relatively thin. Felt is actually on the thicker side. I wouldn't go anything thicker than that. But like some performance fabrics, like the kind of fabric that you might make a suit out of or a dance costume, that type of fabric is really good. It's stretchy, it's not going to fray, and it's really thin. So then I also sculpted the back of my present with some red just to add some thickness, and I'm just going to gently file it with just it's a 180 grit file to smooth it out, make it a little more square, touch up the edges if I need to. And there's also just a little icicle kind of on the top of the present from the nail form, and I just trimmed that off with my manicure scissors. So now on a nail form backing, once again, I am going to be just placing 2 little beads of green acrylic down and then patting them into diamond shapes. And so this is going to be for making a bow, and as you can see compared to my finger, these are really very quite small. Really very quite. That's a new combination of words. And so after they're turning matte, you can sort of slide your brush underneath and fold them in half. This is going to create your 2 halves of your bow that is going to go on top of the gift. So I'm just going to let those set and leave them to the side for a second and go back to my gift. So I'm going to add the ribbons that are going around the present with the same green that I have been using all along for his hat and his shirt and his shoes and the bow. And I'm going to add the ribbon going around it. So first I'm going to go around it vertically. So just, you can go, it's pretty easy to see from the wire that's going into the center of the present. That's where you want, and just continue that down and around. You would not have to use acrylic. Doing this ribbon with acrylic to get it to be straight and even and all that might not be the easiest of tasks, especially if you don't have a nice small sculpting brush like the 3D brush I have. It probably wouldn't be the easiest thing, so you could use acrylic paint instead and just paint them on, keeping in mind that they might not match your bow on top perfectly just because you're not using the same product. Even if you're using 2 reds, not every red is going to be the same, so that's the only downside of doing it that way, but it would be quicker and easier and smoother, and it's up to you. So then to attach your bow, just place a little bead of the green acrylic down and then stick both ends, or stick one end of each of your bow halves in there, add another bead on top of the connection, and that is good. So now to be painting my elf, I took some brown acrylic paint and I'm going to be painting the little details to his face and to his hands. So just going to outline pretty much his nose, his ears, and his hands. And then a little bit more with the brown, I'm going to just add some details to his hair. And that's just the front of his hair because I can't really see the back of it. And then with white, I added his eyes. And then with some pink, I just put a couple little circles on his cheeks to give him a nice rosy complexion. With brown again, I'm going to be adding his eyebrows. And then with black pupils, I'm going to be adding pupils. And then I'm going to be also adding a black smile. And I wanted to give him sort of a mischievous smile, because he's saying yes and no. So do you give him a sad face or do you give him a happy face? So I decided I would go with like a half smirk, so it could really go either way. And then I've just added some more details, outline his clothing with a little bit with the black paint. And when I use black paint, 99% of the time I dilute it, which I did do this time. It goes on smoother with thinner lines and it just seems to work a little bit better. And so I just added outlines to almost everything, especially his pants because it is white against a white background, to make sure that they stood out nice and well. Even after they have their red stripes, which I am giving them now, I still wanted to make sure that you could see them easily. So like I said, I just added candy cane red stripes against his legs, or not against, but on his legs. And then I also painted his neck red. That's going to sort of hide that little bit of wire behind the scarf. And that is it. If you'd like to, you can add matte top coat over your elf. I normally would, but I guess I forgot. Sometimes that happens. I think I might add that later on. But add matte top coat just to cover up that acrylic paint to make sure that it doesn't wear off. And please share any recreations with me on Facebook and Instagram. I would absolutely love to see them, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!